There are thresholds in our lives that are not made of wood and steel, but of silence and space. They are the invisible lines between what has always been and what might be. For months, the most significant threshold in my world was the 4 inches that Julian left his bedroom door ajar. It was not a grand gesture, not a declaration, but a question hanging in the quiet air of our apartment. An invitation written in shadow and light. Before, his door was a solid, declarative statement. It was the architectural equivalent of his personality. Closed, certain, self-contained. Julian's life was a series of rooms he moved through with confidence, closing each door neatly behind him. His relationship with Sarah, his career, his neatly compartmentalized friendship with me. But after she left, the door to his room, like the door to himself, was left perpetually, achingly open. And every night, I would sit on the living room couch, the blue light of a muted television flickering across my face, and I would just watch that sliver of hallway, that narrow glimpse into his world, and I would wonder if I would ever be brave enough to cross it. The shift began, as so many seismic changes do, with a tremor so small it was almost imperceptible. It was a Tuesday, a day of monotonous gray rain that slicked the city streets and blurred the windows of our apartment into watercolor paintings of the world outside. I remember the smell of damp concrete and the rhythmic, meditative patter against the glass. I was in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea, trying to coax warmth back into my fingers after a long walk with my camera. The sound of the key in the lock was different that evening. It lacked its usual brisk, definitive turn. There was a fumbling, a hesitation, and then the door swung inward to reveal Julian, looking as if he'd been hollowed out from the inside. His posture, normally a straight, confident line drawn from his days as a swim captain, was bowed. His shoulders slumped, and the vibrant energy that always seemed to radiate from him, a low, charismatic hum, was gone. All that remained was a profound and unnerving stillness. He did not speak. He simply walked past me, his expensive work shoes silent on the worn hardwood floor, and dropped his briefcase by the couch. The sound it made, a soft, defeated thud, was louder than any words he could have spoken. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the blank television screen, his back to me. I could see the tension in the muscles of his neck, the way his hands were clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists at his sides. I knew, with the kind of intuitive certainty that comes from years of quiet observation, that this was not about a bad day at work. This was a deeper fracture. This was structural damage. My own heart began to beat a frantic, worried rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird fluttering in a cage of bone. I wanted to ask, to bridge the chasm of silence that had opened up in our living room, but the words felt like stones in my throat. We had a language, he and I, but it was one built on shared jokes, sports commentary, and a careful, unspoken understanding of boundaries. It was not a language equipped for this kind of raw, visible pain. "She's gone," he finally said, and his voice was a ruin. It was rough and broken, a sound I had never heard from him before. It was the voice of a man who had been shouting into a void and had only just now heard the echo. Sarah. The name hung in the air between us, a ghost. I had never particularly liked her, a fact I kept locked away in the most private chambers of my heart. It was not because she was unkind or cruel. She was perfectly pleasant, in a polished, detached sort of way. I disliked her because she did not see him, not the real him. She saw the Julian that was presented to the world, the successful consultant, the former star athlete, the charming man who could command a room with a smile. She did not see the flicker of exhaustion in his eyes after a long week, or the way he would trace the patterns on his coffee mug when he was lost in thought, or the quiet, almost boyish vulnerability that would surface in rare, unguarded moments. I saw those things. I saw them, and I cataloged them, and I held them dear. Her leaving was, on some selfish, terrible level, a relief. But seeing the devastation it had wrought upon him eclipsed any other feeling. All I could feel was his pain, a vast, cold ocean pulling me under. He turned then, and his eyes met mine. They were wide and lost, the brilliant blue of them clouded over with a storm of confusion and hurt. For the first time since I had known him, he looked at me not as a friend, not as a roommate, but as a lifeline. He looked at me as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had just dissolved around him. He took a single, faltering step toward me. It was a movement of pure, unthinking instinct. A reaching. "Leo," he whispered, and my name was a plea. I did not think. I simply moved. I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around him. It was a clumsy, awkward embrace, unfamiliar territory for us both. We were not tactile people, not with each other. Our physical contact was limited to the occasional backslap after a win or a brief, supportive hand on the shoulder. This was different. This was anchoring. He was stiff at first, a statue of grief, but then something inside him broke. A shudder ran through his entire body, a deep, convulsive tremor, and he sagged against me, burying his face in the crook of my neck. He did not cry, not with sound, but I could feel the silent, desperate sobs shaking his frame. I just held him. I held him and ran a hand up and down his back in a slow, steady rhythm, trying to pour all the silent, stored-up comfort I had into that single, repetitive motion. The rain continued its soft percussion against the windows, a soundtrack to the complete and utter dismantling of my friend and the quiet, terrifying beginning of something else. That night was the catalyst. It was the moment the earth shifted beneath our feet, altering the topography of our friendship forever. He eventually pulled away, mumbled a thank you, and disappeared into his room, closing the door behind him. But the next night, the door was left ajar. And so the ritual began. It started with movies. Julian had always loved movies, but now they became a necessity, a way to fill the echoing silence of the apartment. He would come home from work, his face still etched with a lingering sadness, and he would simply point to the television and say, "Anything good on?" It was not a question so much as a statement of need. So we would watch. At first, we maintained the usual geography of our couch, me on the left, him on the right, a respectable cushion of neutral territory between us. It was a space defined by years of platonic familiarity, a comfortable distance we both understood and respected. I would lose myself in the films, but a part of my awareness was always, irrevocably, fixed on him. I was a human compass, and he was my true north. I was attuned to the slightest shift in his posture, the subtle change in his breathing, the way his fingers would drum restlessly on his knee. I was studying him, as I had always done, but now my observation was tinged with a new, anxious tenderness. I was watching for signs of the storm that had broken him, looking for the lingering clouds in his eyes. I wanted to heal him, to somehow absorb his pain into myself, but I did not know how. All I knew how to do was be present, to sit in the quiet darkness with him and offer my silent companionship as a bulwark against the loneliness that I knew was threatening to drown him. Then, about a week into this new routine, another line was crossed. We were watching some forgettable action movie, all explosions and quippy one-liners. Julian had been quiet all evening, a more distant, withdrawn version of his grief. Halfway through the film, he sighed, a long, weary exhalation of breath, and shifted on the couch. He leaned over, slowly, deliberately, and rested his head on my shoulder. The world stopped. My entire consciousness narrowed to that single point of contact. The weight of his head, the surprising softness of his hair against my cheek, the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, ringing silence of my own mind. My body went rigid. Every muscle tensed, preparing for what? Rejection? A quick, embarrassed retreat? I held my breath, waiting. But he did not move. He just settled in, letting out another soft sigh, this one of comfort, of release. He was seeking refuge, and for reasons I could not comprehend, he had chosen me. My shoulder. My space. It was a gesture of profound, almost childish trust, and it undid me completely. Slowly, painstakingly, I forced myself to relax. I let the air out of my lungs in a silent, shaky exhale. I tried to focus on the movie, on the flashing lights and booming sounds, but it was impossible. My entire being was consumed by the man leaning against me. It was the most exquisite torture I had ever known. To have him so close, to have the thing I had secretly wanted for years, but to have it under this false pretense. It was a comfort born of his pain, and that knowledge was a bitter pill. But still, he was there. He was warm, and he was real, and he was trusting me with his exhaustion, with his vulnerability. And so I sat there, as still as a statue, for the next hour, my shoulder a sanctuary. That became the new normal. The cushion of space between us on the couch vanished, eroded by his nightly need for proximity. He would sit down, and within minutes, he would be leaning against me, his head on my shoulder or his leg pressed against mine. It became an unspoken agreement, a ritual of comfort that we enacted without comment. He needed the physical contact, the simple, grounding reassurance of another human being, and I, in my silent, complicated love for him, was a willing provider. I told myself it was just that. I was being a good friend. I was helping him through the darkest period of his life. I repeated this to myself like a mantra, a shield against the hope that was beginning to blossom, wild and dangerous, in the secret garden of my heart. But the ritual kept escalating, evolving in subtle, significant ways. One night, he fell asleep on me. His breathing deepened, his body went slack, and his head lolled from my shoulder into my lap. I sat there for hours after the movie ended, the credits rolling in an endless, silent loop. I was trapped, pinned by the weight of him, but it was the most willing captivity. I looked down at his face, peaceful in sleep, the lines of stress and sadness smoothed away. His dark eyelashes rested against his cheek, and his lips were slightly parted. He looked younger, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. The urge to reach out, to brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead, was a physical ache in my chest. It was a dangerous impulse, one that threatened to shatter the fragile, unspoken truce we had established. I resisted. I just watched him, memorizing the planes of his face in the dim, blue light, my heart a tangle of love and pity and a desperate, soaring hope. Eventually, my own body began to betray my carefully constructed defenses. My hand, resting on the cushion beside his head, seemed to move of its own volition. My fingers twitched, yearning to touch him. I fought it, clenching my fist until my knuckles were white. But the impulse was too strong. Slowly, tentatively, I uncurled my fingers and let my hand rest on his back. I expected him to stir, to wake up, to pull away. But he just sighed in his sleep and leaned into my touch, a small, unconscious movement that felt like a seismic event. My hand was a brand on his sweater, and I could feel the warmth of his skin through the fabric. I began to trace small, slow circles on his back, the same comforting motion I had used that first night. It felt different now. It was no longer just comfort. It was a caress. It was a confession. And in the safety of his sleep, in the darkness of our living room, I allowed myself this one small, selfish transgression. I allowed myself to touch him as I had always wanted to touch him. The nights bled into one another, a blur of flickering screens and shared silence and the constant, electric proximity of him. The line between friendship and something more grew thinner and more transparent with each passing day. We were living in a liminal space, a house of unspoken things. He continued to leave his door ajar, and I continued to sit on the couch, watching it, the anxiety and the longing a constant, low-grade fever in my blood. I became a scholar of his nonverbal cues, an archaeologist digging for meaning in the ruins of his heartbreak. Did the way his hand brushed mine when he reached for the popcorn mean anything? Did the extra second his eyes lingered on mine hold some hidden significance? I was lost in a labyrinth of my own making, desperate for a map, for a sign that I was not just imagining the current that flowed between us. The anxiety was a constant companion. I lived in a state of suspended animation, perpetually holding my breath. I was terrified of making a wrong move, of saying the wrong thing, of misinterpreting the signals and shattering this fragile, precious thing we had built. This new intimacy was a glass sculpture, beautiful and delicate, and I was afraid my clumsy, hopeful hands would be the ones to break it. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. What if this was just about Sarah? What if, once he was healed, he would retreat back to his side of the couch, back behind his closed door, and our friendship would be forever altered by this strange, intense interlude? The thought was a physical pain, a sharp, twisting pang of anticipated loss. I was walking a tightrope, and the fall looked endless. Then came the night of the storm. Not a metaphorical one, but a real, honest-to-God tempest that threw rain against our windows like handfuls of gravel and made the old building groan and shudder. The power flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the apartment into a sudden, profound darkness and silence. The television screen went black, and the only light came from the frantic, intermittent flashes of lightning that illuminated the room in stark, ghostly detail. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sudden absence of noise was deafening. "Well," Julian said, his voice a low murmur in the dark. "Guess that's it for the movie." A particularly bright flash of lightning lit up his face. He was already looking at me. His expression was unreadable, a fleeting sculpture of light and shadow. My heart stuttered. The air between us, always charged, was now thick with a new, palpable energy. The storm outside seemed to have found its way inside, into the small space between us on the couch. He had been leaning against me, as usual, but now he shifted, turning to face me more fully. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. He was so close, dangerously close. "Leo," he said, and his voice was different. It was quiet, tentative, stripped of all its usual confidence. It was the voice of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down. "Yeah." I managed to breathe, my own voice barely a whisper. Another flash of lightning. His eyes were wide, searching mine. He looked scared, and that, more than anything, broke through my own fear. He was just as lost in this as I was. He swallowed, and I saw the bob of his Adam's apple in the next flash. He raised a hand, slowly, as if testing the weight of the air. He did not touch me. He just let his hand hover in the space between us, his fingers slightly curled. "A question. Would it be weird?" he started, his voice cracking slightly. He stopped, took a breath, and tried again. "Would it be okay if I—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. I knew. Every cell in my body knew. The unspoken question hung between us, more real than any sound. It was the culmination of weeks of shared silence, of hesitant touches, of unspoken need. It was the key to the labyrinth, and the answer was mine to give. The tightrope I had been walking for so long was swaying violently, but for the first time, I was not afraid of the fall. I was afraid of staying where I was. I did not speak. I simply closed the small distance between us and answered his question. The kiss was not passionate or demanding. It was tentative. It was hesitant. It was a discovery. It was the soft, searching pressure of his lips against mine, a moment of impossible, breathtaking vulnerability. It tasted of salt and rain and a loneliness so profound it felt like my own. In that instant, the world fell away. There was no storm, no darkness, no apartment, no past. There was only this quiet, terrifying, beautiful point of contact. This crossing. When we finally pulled apart, the lightning flashed again, and I saw my own shock and wonder reflected in his wide, star-bright eyes. The ritual was over. Something new had begun. To understand what that kiss meant, you have to understand the foundation it was built upon. You have to go back to a brightly chlorinated pool, the air thick with the scent of ozone and effort. Back to a time when Julian was not a man broken by heartbreak, but a god carved from sunlight and water. We met in college, on the university swim team. He was the captain, of course. It was a role he seemed born to inhabit. He moved with an easy, unconscious grace, his smile a casual currency he spent freely on everyone. He was all broad shoulders and a booming laugh, the kind of person who seemed to generate his own gravity, pulling people into his orbit without even trying. He was a star, and the rest of us were just celestial bodies, content to reflect his light. I was not like that. I was a distance swimmer, built for endurance, not for explosive speed. My relationship with the water was different from his. For him, it was an arena, a place to conquer. For me, it was a sanctuary, a place of monastic silence. I loved the rhythmic pull and glide, the muffled quiet beneath the surface, the feeling of my body becoming a clean, efficient machine. I was on the team for the discipline, for the solitude within the crowd. I was a quiet observer, a ghost in the water, content to exist on the periphery. My real passion was not in the pool, but in what I saw around it. My camera was my second skin, an extension of my eye. I had a cheap, second-hand film camera that I took everywhere, and my favorite subject was the swim team. I loved capturing the unglamorous moments. The exhaustion after a grueling practice, the steam rising from the water in the cold morning air, the way the fluorescent lights of the natatorium reflected off the wet tiles, the shared look of grim determination between two swimmers before a race. I was trying to photograph the feeling, not just the action. And, if I were being honest with myself, I was mostly trying to photograph Julian. Not the triumphant Julian, arms raised in victory, but the other one. The one I caught glimpses of when he thought no one was looking. I had a photograph, one I kept hidden in a box under my bed, that I considered my masterpiece. It was Julian, sitting on the edge of the pool after practice, alone. The lights had been turned down, and he was shrouded in shadow, except for a single beam of light that caught the water droplets on his back, making them sparkle like a constellation. He was staring down into the dark water, his face a mask of profound weariness. In that moment, he was not the captain, not the star. He was just a boy, carrying a weight I could only guess at. That was the Julian I was in love with. Our friendship was an unlikely thing. It began with him noticing my camera. He came up to me after practice one day, dripping water onto the concrete, a towel slung around his neck. "What are you always taking pictures of, Leo?" he asked, his voice full of genuine, friendly curiosity. I was so startled that he was speaking to me, directly, that I just stammered something about liking the light. He smiled that easy, brilliant smile. "Let me see them sometime," he said. And then he was gone, off to lead the team in stretches, leaving me with a wildly beating heart and the smell of chlorine. He did not forget. He kept asking, gently teasing me about my secret art project, until one day I finally, nervously, showed him a few of the prints. They were mostly abstract shots of light and water, but a few were of the team, of him. I watched his face as he looked at them, terrified of his reaction. He was quiet for a long time, studying a photo of his own hands, gripping the starting block, the knuckles white with tension. "This is how it feels," he said, his voice soft with wonder. "I've never been able to explain it. But this is it." He looked up at me, and his eyes were different. He was not just seeing the quiet guy from Lane 4 anymore. He was seeing me. From that day on, something shifted. He started seeking me out. He would sit with me on the bus to away meets, asking me questions about photography, about what I saw that he did not. He would tell me about the pressure he felt, the crushing weight of expectation from his coaches, his parents, himself. He talked to me in a way I had never seen him talk to his other friends. With them, he was the leader, the entertainer. With me, he was just Julian. I became his confidant, his quiet harbor. He would burn so brightly, so intensely, for everyone else. And then he would come to me to recharge, to be quiet. Our friendship was a secret room that only we had the key to. I treasured it more than anything. It was enough. I told myself it was enough. To be the one he trusted, to be the one who saw the man behind the myth, was a privilege I would not have traded for anything. My love for him was a silent, subterranean river, flowing steadily beneath the surface of our friendship. I never let it show. I was terrified that if he ever suspected, it would scare him away. He was a creature of the sun, and my love felt like a thing of shadows and depths. So I guarded it. I built walls around it, and I was content to live within them, as long as I could have him as my friend. After college, when he asked me to get an apartment with him, I was stunned. He could have lived with anyone. But he chose me. "I need a quiet place, Leo," he'd said. "The world is too loud. You're not loud." And so we built a life together, a domestic routine of shared bills and groceries, and peaceful coexistence. He started dating Sarah, and I played the role of the supportive friend, my heart aching with a quiet, familiar pain. But I had him. I had our movie nights, our easy companionship, our unspoken understanding. I had the Julian who would come home and collapse on the couch and talk to me about his day, the real day, not the curated version he gave to everyone else. The foundation of our friendship was solid. It was built on years of trust, of shared vulnerability, of a deep and abiding affection. It was a beautiful, priceless thing. And that was why the kiss, that one moment in the stormy darkness, was so terrifying. Because it had the power to bring the entire structure crashing down. It was a gamble for the highest stakes imaginable. His friendship, or everything. The morning after the storm was unnervingly quiet. The rain had stopped, and a weak, watery sunlight was filtering through the blinds, painting stripes across the living room floor. I woke up on the couch, a crick in my neck, the scratchy throw blanket tangled around my legs. The apartment was empty. Julian's door, which had been the focal point of my entire existence for months, was closed. Not ajar. Closed. It was a declaration. A period at the end of a sentence I did not want to read. A cold, heavy dread began to pool in my stomach. I got up and walked to his door, my feet silent on the floorboards. I pressed my ear against the wood, but there was no sound. I checked the small rack by the front door. His work shoes were gone. His keys were gone. He had left before I woke up, slipping out of the apartment like a thief. My mind raced, replaying the kiss over and over again. Had I imagined it? Had I misread everything so completely? The memory was vivid, the feeling of his lips on mine, the shared, startled breath we had taken afterwards. But in the stark, unforgiving light of morning, it felt like a dream. A beautiful, impossible dream that was now dissolving into a nightmare of doubt and anxiety. He was running. He was scared. And in his fear, he was closing doors. The one to his bedroom, the one to the fragile, new space we had just stepped into. I felt a wave of nausea. I had been so stupid. I had let my own desperate wanting blind me to the reality of the situation. He was grieving. He was lonely. He was reaching for any port in a storm, and I had just been the closest one. It did not mean what I thought it meant. It could not have. The next few days were a special kind of hell. It was a return to the time before Sarah left, but worse. It was a hollow echo of what we used to be. Julian was a ghost in our own home. He came home late and left early. When we were in the same room, he avoided my eyes. He was polite, unnaturally so. He would ask me about my day with a strained, formal cheerfulness that was more painful than silence. The easy intimacy we had shared, both before and after his breakup, was gone. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the memory of that kiss. The couch became a vast, empty expanse again. We sat on our designated sides, the phantom of the cushion between us now a canyon. The silence was no longer comfortable. It was a weapon. It was an accusation. Every time he looked away, every time he manufactured a reason to be in his room with the door shut, it was a small, sharp cut to my heart. I was drowning in the ambiguity, in his retreat. The hope that had been so bright and fierce just days before was now a guttering, smoky flame, threatening to go out completely. I felt a cold, bitter anger begin to curdle inside me, directed not at him, but at myself. For being a fool. For daring to believe that the rules of the universe could bend for me, just once. For mistaking a moment of desperate comfort for a declaration of love. The hurt was a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. I stopped taking my camera out. The world seemed to have lost its color, its interesting light. Everything was just a flat, gray expanse of disappointment. I knew I could not let it go on. This state of limbo was corroding the very foundations of our friendship. If we were going to lose what we had, I wanted it to be a clean break, not this slow, agonizing decay. I wanted the truth, even if the truth was that I had imagined everything. I needed to know. I waited for him to come home one evening, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I heard his key in the lock, the familiar sound now a trigger for my anxiety. He came in, gave me a tight, forced smile, and started to head straight for his room, his usual escape route. "Julian," I said. My voice was steady, clearer than I expected it to be. He stopped, his hand on his doorknob. He did not turn around. "Yeah. Don't," I said, and the word was sharper than I intended. "Don't just walk away. Not again." He turned then, slowly. His face was a mask of exhaustion and conflict. The confident, easygoing captain was gone. This was the boy from the edge of the pool, the man who had collapsed in my arms. He looked cornered. He looked terrified. "I don't know what you want me to say, Leo," he said, his voice low and strained. "I want you to say something," I replied, my own voice rising with a frustration I could no longer contain. "Anything. I want you to look at me. I want you to tell me what's going on. Did I dream it? Did I imagine what happened the other night? Because this silence, this pretending, it's killing me. If I crossed a line, then just say it. If it was a mistake, I can live with that. But I can't live in this space between. I can't do it." He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was not annoyance or rejection. It was a raw, desperate panic. He looked like a man trapped in a burning building, with no idea which way to run. He took a step into the living room, away from the safety of his closed door, and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure distress. "You didn't imagine it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He stared at the floor, unable to look at me. It wasn't a mistake. A single, fragile tendril of hope unfurled in my chest. "Then what is this?" I asked, my voice softer now. "What are you so afraid of?" He let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He finally looked up, and his eyes were glistening. "Me," he said, his voice thick with a self-recrimination that broke my heart. "I'm afraid of me, Leo. I don't know who I am right now. Everything I thought was true, everything I thought I wanted, it's all gone. When Sarah left, it was like the floor just fell out from under me, and I was falling. And then, there was you. You were just there. You were solid. You were quiet. And being near you, it was the only thing that made sense. It was the only thing that felt real." He paced the small space between us, his movements agitated, his words coming in a torrent, as if a dam had finally broken. "I needed you. I needed the comfort. I told myself that's all it was. You're my best friend. Of course I would turn to you. But then, it wasn't just comfort anymore, was it? It was more. Leaning on you on the couch, it felt like coming home. And that scared the hell out of me. Because it felt more like home than anything I ever had with her. With anyone." He stopped in front of me, his chest heaving, his face a mess of confusion and dawning realization. "And the kiss," he choked on the word. "I wanted it. I wanted it so badly. In that moment, it was the only thing in the world I wanted. But the next morning, I woke up, and I was terrified. What does this mean? Who am I if this is what I want? I've spent my whole life on this one, straight track, and suddenly I'm in a different country, and I don't speak the language. I didn't know how to face you. I didn't know how to face myself. So I ran. I'm sorry, Leo. I'm so sorry. I'm so lost." His confession, his raw, unvarnished fear and confusion, washed away all of my own anger and hurt. All I could see was the man I loved, struggling, caught in a current he did not understand. I saw the scared boy from the edge of the pool, afraid of the depths. I stepped forward and, for the second time, I wrapped my arms around him. This time, there was no hesitation. He clung to me, his body shaking, and for the first time, he let himself cry. He buried his face in my shoulder and wept, not silently, but with deep, ragged sobs of grief and fear and a profound, terrifying relief. And I just held him, my own tears silently tracing paths down my cheeks. The closed door had been breached. The silence had been broken. And in the wreckage, we finally had a chance to build something real. The conversation that followed his confession was not easy. It was halting and awkward, punctuated by long stretches of silence as we both struggled to find the words for feelings we had never tried to articulate before. We sat on the couch, but this time it felt different. The space between us was not a chasm, but a deliberate, respectful distance, a space to breathe. We were not falling into old rituals. We were trying to create a new language. He told me about the suffocating pressure he had felt his whole life to be a certain kind of man, to want a certain kind of life. He talked about his relationship with Sarah, how he had been trying to convince himself he was happy, that he was in love, because it was what was expected of him. He admitted that the comfort he found with me, the quiet, unconditional acceptance, was something he had never experienced before, and he had not known how to process it. I listened. For the first time, I felt like I could be completely honest, too. I told him about the years of silent affection, about watching him from the next lane in the pool, about the box of photographs under my bed. I told him how his friendship was the most important thing in my life, and how my greatest fear had always been losing it. I confessed that his pain had been my pain, and his tentative reach for comfort had been my secret, most fervent hope. It was a stripping away of layers, a mutual, terrifying act of emotional disarmament. We were laying our weapons on the ground, all the self-protection and denial and fear. We were standing before each other, completely undefended. There was no grand, cinematic resolution that night. There was no passionate kiss to seal the deal. When we finally ran out of words, a deep, quiet exhaustion settled over us. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed but clear for the first time in months. "I don't know what this is, Leo," he said, his voice soft. "And I don't know where it's going. But I don't want to run anymore. I want to stay. I want to figure it out. With you. If you'll let me. I'm not going anywhere," I said. And it was a promise. The days that followed were a study in quiet intention. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. We were learning to navigate this new territory together, step by tentative step. The ritual of the movie nights returned, but it was different. When he leaned his head on my shoulder now, it was not a gesture of unconscious need, but a conscious choice. It was a question, "Is this okay?" And my arm wrapping around his shoulders was the answer. Yes. We started holding hands. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. His fingers laced with mine on the couch, my thumb stroking the back of his hand. It was a silent, constant conversation, a reaffirmation of the connection we had finally acknowledged. We started to build a new kind of domesticity. One morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen to find Julian, looking clumsy and unsure, trying to work my complicated French press. He gave me a sheepish smile. "Figured it was my turn," he said. We drank coffee together at the kitchen table, the early morning sun slanting through the window, and it felt more intimate, more real, than any of the hundreds of meals we had shared before. We were relearning how to simply be in a space together, but as something new, something more. One evening, I was in my makeshift darkroom, the small, windowless bathroom off the hall, developing the photos I had taken during the storm. The red safe light cast a warm, crimson glow over everything, turning the familiar space into a secret, sacred chamber. I was lost in the process, watching an image of lightning over the city skyline slowly emerge in the developer tray. It was a process of patience and discovery, of bringing light out of darkness. The door creaked open, spilling a sliver of hallway light into my red-soaked world. It was Julian. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, hesitant. "Sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want to interrupt." "You're not," I said, my voice soft in the quiet room. "Come in, but close the door." He stepped inside and gently clicked the door shut, plunging us back into the deep, monastic red. He came to stand behind me, peering over my shoulder at the photograph floating in the chemical bath. He did not speak. He just wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. We stood there for a long time, in the warm, red darkness, his arms a circle of safety around me. I could feel the steady, calm beat of his heart against my back. He was not clinging to me out of desperation anymore. He was holding me with a quiet, certain strength. It was a new kind of embrace. It was not about seeking refuge from a storm. It was about being the harbor. That night, when we went to bed, he paused outside my room. I paused outside his. The old geography of our apartment, the unspoken rules, hung in the air for a final moment. He looked at my door, then at his own, the one that was now always closed. Then he looked at me, a small, hopeful smile playing on his lips. He did not say anything. He just held out his hand. I took it, and together, we walked into my room, and we closed the door behind us. There, in the quiet darkness, there were no more thresholds to cross, no more unspoken questions hanging in the air. There was only the profound, bone-deep peace of a long journey home. We learned that the safest rooms are not built of walls and doors, but of trust and vulnerability. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had fought so hard to create, we finally began to build a home in each other.